I'm Ed Asner. As an auto worker in Chicago, I became more than just a union member. I became an activist. Then my career moved west, and many of you came to know me on screen. As a member and then president of the Screen Actors Guild, I came to understand just what a union card means. I came to appreciate what the glorious history of the trade union movement has meant to workers the world over. And no union has a prouder history than the International Union of Bricklayers and Allied Craft Workers. Spanning 3 centuries, this is your story. Like the materials we build with, the International Union of Bricklayers and Allied Craft Workers is strong, resilient, and long-lasting. Bold and innovative when it needs to be, and always enduring. This union has come a long way and changed with the times, learning to work well with many different materials. But one thing hasn't changed: pride. Pride in your work and pride in your union. Well, they go together and are part of the union's long history. Craft workers built America with brick and stone. And as the Civil War came to an end, bricklayers found they had to fight for their rights as workers. Bosses had the bricklayers working from sunrise to sunset, with never enough pay to make a decent life for their families. When they complained, their grievances went unheard. When they tried to organize, they got fired. Those who believed in the ability of ordinary people to organize in free, democratic trade unions prevailed. Small regional unions sprang up in major cities, and when the Baltimore bricklayers struck for the right to work any job, union brothers in Philadelphia came to their aid with financial help and with stay-away notices to their members. Solidarity triumphed. In October, delegates from the Baltimore and Philadelphia unions met in the Cradle of Liberty to form a national organization. A union whose innovation and resilience helped create a strong foundation that would span 3 centuries. Today, the oldest continuously operating labor union in North America. The union grew rapidly, and many members were joining the fight for an 8-hour day. It would be a long struggle. When employers in Poughkeepsie, New York announced they would hire no worker unless he gave up his union membership, the local went on strike. With the support of the National Union and the leadership of President John Frost of Brooklyn, they won. At its 1868 convention, the Union made the first of several changes to its name. It had chartered 41 locals and had almost 6,000 members. The following January, Union leadership voted to support any local union who went on strike for the 8-hour day. Then disaster struck. America faced a brutal depression. By 1879, membership in the National Union had fallen to just 229 members. As the economy roared back in the 1880s, so did the Union. In 1881, the first locals in Canada were chartered. In 1884, the name was changed again to recognize the Union's international nature and to include the stonemasons. membership rose to over 13,000 in 1884 and 24,000 by 1891. At the Worcester Convention, the Union also took an anti-discrimination stand, recognizing an individual's right to membership regardless of race, creed, or color. Union Secretary Thomas O'Day founded the Journal in 1898, which became the voice of the Union. America was building again. Tall buildings, cast iron, wrought iron, steel, and fireproof hollow tile began to replace brick in many applications. The word skyscraper was born. New construction materials and techniques meant new challenges for the Union and its members.
A good example of the changes in the industry is the Wainwright Building in downtown St. Louis. It was one of the first buildings where the architects and engineers used a steel structural framing system to be the structural part of the building, and they moved away from the use of masonry as a load-bearing product. So the masonry products on that building became a facade rather than the structural system, and we know it's one of the turning points in architecture and in engineering here in the United States, and also one of the turning points in the use of masonry.
The Union adapted to a changing world as the 20th century dawned. Immigrants came to North America seeking freedom, opportunity, and fairness, bringing with them old world skills and craftsmanship. For many, America began here, in the Great Hall at Ellis Island. For these newcomers, becoming a union craft worker was a way to overcome the exploitation of low wages and harsh living conditions that many experienced. In this exciting period of growth, the Union established permanent headquarters in Indianapolis. And in Canada, workers gained new protections with the creation of a Department of Labor. The Union changed its name again as part of a campaign to include all plasterers, a change that would remain in place for 65 years. The Union established a mortuary fund to aid a member's family at his death, and a pension fund called the Relief Fund. The marble workers and the tile setters became part of the growing umbrella of the International Union, and together members confronted the open shop and non-union contractors. These continuing battles with employers brought the Union closer to the other building trades, many of which were members of the American Federation of Labor, or AFL. For years, the Bricklayers Union vigorously maintained its independence. Then on October 12, 1916, after much thought and debate, the Union became a part of the AFL. Events brought the war in Europe to America's shores, and we went off to fight for freedom in the trenches of France, in what they said was a war to end all wars. At home, we built the factories and barracks, and for the first time, the government was on our side. In the words of U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, "While we are fighting for freedom, we must see to it that labor is free, that the conditions of labor are not rendered more onerous by the war, and that the instrumentalities by which the conditions of labor are improved are not checked." The Allied nations rejoiced at the armistice ending World War I, but many never returned. War casualties depleted the Union's mortuary fund. The 20s roared in. The economic downturn of 1921 gave bosses the chance to revive the open shop campaign in an attempt to lower wages. Warren G. Harding, a staunch Republican, was elected President of the United States on the slogan, "Back to Normalcy." For opponents of unionism, this meant a return to non-union conditions. This wasn't just a war of words. Company-hired goon squads attacked union workers and broke up attempts to organize. In many cities, union contractors were unable to get building materials unless they agreed to an open shop. To keep members working for fair wages, your union went out and bought their own brick factories, supplying union contractors with materials at cost. Anticipating that future battles of the labor movement would be fought in the courts and in the halls of Congress, the International Union moved its headquarters to Washington, D.C. in 1925. And in 1926 adopted the classification of concrete block layer. By the mid-20s, a building boom was on and members had no trouble getting work at union scale. Things were definitely looking up. The Great Depression hit the union hard. Membership dropped from roughly 130,000 in the late 20s to 34,000 by 1934. In just 5 years, 3/4 of the membership was gone.
I, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the...
When he took the oath of office that blustery March day in Washington, it was in the midst of a dark time for his country. The banks were failing, farms were in ruin. An army of hungry men walked in the streets looking for work.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt told Americans, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." As president, FDR ushered in a new deal for American workers. The National Industrial Recovery Administration called for $3 billion for construction loans and grants. The WPA had $4 billion to get people back to work. These programs set minimum wage scales called area rates that were friendly to labor. Congress passed a landmark Davis-Bacon Act, which required that workers on government projects be paid the prevailing wage. The Wagner Act created the National Labor Relations Board and guaranteed labor's right to collective bargaining. Congress created Social Security. All of these were great gains for the union and for working people everywhere. The bricklayers rejoined the AFL's Building and Construction Trades Department, having withdrawn in 1927 due to jurisdictional issues. In 1936, John L. Lewis pulled the United Mine Workers out of the AFL and organized non-craft workers under the CIO, or Congress of Industrial Organizations. The Bricklayers Union had bought the F.H. Smith Building and an adjoining building in Washington for its permanent headquarters. Following construction, the building opened in 1940 as the Bowen Building, named for William J. Bowen, president of the Union from 1904 to 1928.
And the enemy struck at America. A day that will live in infamy.
And again we went to war. The Union helped establish the Navy construction battalions in World War II, and many of our members joined them. They became famous as the Seabees. Others served with pride in every branch of the service. And the Union set up a war fund to pay the dues of members in the armed forces. At home, the huge need for wartime construction of war plants and bases caused a freeze on all non-essential construction. This was a hardship for members such as marble setters, terrazzo workers, tile layers, and plasterers. Union President Harry Bates asked President Roosevelt to have the design of the Pentagon changed to make it a brick building, and actually succeeded in having the plans changed to include some brickwork. Together, members built war plants or took jobs in them or went to fight and win the war. Again, some of us didn't come home. But for those who did, there were houses to build, and offices, factories, stores, all that non-essential construction that had been postponed for 4 long years. Shortages of brick and tile led to construction with concrete block and masonry walls. Congress renewed its attacks on labor, passing the Taft-Hartley Act, which banned the closed shop. President Truman vetoed it, calling it a bad bill. But Congress overrode his veto, and Taft-Hartley, unfortunately, became law. And again the bugle sounded. And again we went to war. In Korea this time. While at home, the Cold War cast a long shadow across the land. Many people built fallout shelters lined with brick. President Bates realized a 20-year dream when, as chairman of the Unity Committee, the AFL and the CIO came together in 1955. The next year, in another display of unity, the Canadian Labour Congress was founded. The 1958 convention voted to admit President Eisenhower as an honorary member. In accepting, Eisenhower said he was proud of the role the Union had played in building America.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
The 60s opened optimistically. The Union created an award-winning film, Man and Masonry, to tell its story to the world. Much to the pleasure of President and Mrs. Kennedy, the Union showed off its craftsmanship, restoring a fireplace in the White House. The Union created the Institute for Masonry Research to educate architects and builders in the advantages of masonry construction. In 1965, the Union celebrated its 100th birthday with a centennial dinner at which AFL-CIO President George Meany recognized the Union's many achievements. That same year, President Lyndon Johnson signed Medicare into law at the Harry S. Truman Library in Independence, Missouri. Vietnam. America was drawn into yet another war. You'll find the names of BAC members on that wall, too. The 70s ended a long battle for government protection of workers with the passage of the Occupational Safety and Health Act, OSHA. Finally, employers were required by law to protect the health and safety of their workers. To further protect the membership, the International Pension Fund was created. In 1975, the Union changed its name once more. BAC fought price controls and the suspension of the Davis-Bacon Act under President Nixon. Once again, the open shop movement became an excuse for union busting. Housing construction came to a standstill, unemployment went up, and inflation ripped away at wages. A decade that began so well ended with a downturn. The 80s dawned with the election of Ronald Reagan and George Bush, and an outright assault on labor. Ronald Reagan became a hero in the corporate boardrooms when he fired the Patco air traffic controllers for going on strike. Striker replacement became a new rallying cry for corporate America. The goon squads were back, but now they wore three-piece suits and mugged us in the courtroom. They tried again to do away with Davis-Bacon protections and threatened the union system of apprenticeship with parallel programs. Faced with an administration openly hostile to labor, and with threats from non-union competition, from substitute materials, and even from other trades workers and their unions, BAC came up with a bold plan for the future. At the 1985 convention, the Project 2000 Committee presented a strong vision for the future, recognizing that the fate of the masonry industry determines the fate of the union. BAC put renewed support behind the research, training, and masonry marketing efforts of the International Masonry Institute. Masonry Camp, run by the Institute, brings together designers and architects with apprentices to work on a design and build challenge. Those who know the value of masonry will design for its use. Through the creation of Backpack, the union intensified its support for candidates who support issues important to union members. Oh yes, and the union changed its name one more time to the International Union of Bricklayers and Allied Craft Workers. Today we celebrate this union as it spans 3 centuries. We remember the extraordinary actions of ordinary people who helped shape BAC in the past. Together, they have built our communities and have made them better places to live and work. And this union, your union, will protect and defend the rights and the crafts of its members now and into its 3rd century. One union, the oldest labor union in North America, and a damn good one. Proud to be BAC.